computer. All right, we got the record going. Okay, let's do it. Well, good day, friends. This is Brian Russell with Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations. Welcome to episode number 2. And today I'm really excited to have one of my best friends in ministry and a guy that I really respect a lot, Reverend Dr. Michael Beck. He didn't like those titles, but he's Michael Beck, and you're going to love this conversation that we have. So, Michael, welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we've known each other for, it's coming up on 10 years now. And you've really just kind of taken off like a rocket ship here. You were doing some cool things when I first met you, and your ministries continue to expand in exciting ways. And you're helping so many people and also reaching persons with the gospel who maybe in previous generations would never have even been noticed. What excites you the most that you're able to keep this momentum going? What are some of the growing edges of your ministry right now?
Yeah, so just to get a little autobiographical to frame that a little bit, I was a street kid, so I was orphaned and all that, and kind of the local church, the little Methodist church where I grew up was kind of my orphanage. And I was really deeply loved and cared for as a child. And the church was kind of like the safe place in my life. And I know that's not been the experience of many people my age, but that was my experience. But then I had this kind of prodigal season, went out there, alcoholism, addiction, all of those things, train wreck, incarceration. And that's where Jesus kind of redeemed me from, was a place very far away from the church. And so I have a passion for people that are far away from the church. My orientation is usually to those that are not here yet, and that's been a struggle as a ordained elder and a pastor, because I have to balance that caring for the folks that are there and loving them, and they deserve to be pastored and loved and cared for. They've given their lives for the church, and also kind of balancing that with, I really get passionate about people coming to Christ, about transformative, awakening kind of experiences where people just, are going one way in their life and now they're going another way, and Jesus just gets a hold of them. So that keeps my blood pumping kind of, and helps me navigate all the things I'm not so excited about in being in an institutional, church.
Yeah, and so you just recently finished up your Doctor of Ministry degree, and you had the opportunity to study with one of my favorite thinkers. I've never met him or talked to him, but Dr. Leonard Sweet. What drew you to that particular program? And could you just share a little bit about some of how Leonard Sweet's thinking impacted you, or some new mindsets, or even new visions that you got from working with him?
Sure. So actually, our official kind of relationship started through a Facebook Messenger exchange, which was interesting. But I read his work in seminary class at Asbury. I was, familiar with him and his some of his thinking. And we were at something where both of us spoke, and we never really got a chance to connect. But I got this Facebook Messenger message from Leonard Sweet saying, "Hey, you should come study with me at Portland." And I was like, is this really Leonard Sweet? Like, come on. And it was for real. And so we had a little bit of exchange. He sent me some books. And so then I got to, and I was at a moment in my life. I had been out of seminary for a couple of years, and I like to be in the classroom. I like to learn. One of the things being in recovery has taught me is mentorship and apprenticeship, really. Like, I consider myself a Sith apprentice of you on the dark side of the Force when I was studying with you. So I was looking for somebody really like a rabbi, somebody to take on their thinking and their heart and try to read everything they've ever written, which is a challenge with Lynn, and just try to understand them at a deep level. So I said, yeah, I'll come and do this program with you, but I really want it to be more of a mentorship, and also out of the classroom, I want to learn from you just as a follower of Christ. And I think the most important thing I've learned from Lynn, there's so much that I could talk about, but he just recenters me in a Jesus hermeneutic again and again and again. Like, it's all about Jesus. You can get in your social justice things and you can get in all this stuff. Bring it back to the person of Jesus. Bring it back to your relationship with Jesus. He's the centerpiece of the church. He's the centerpiece of our faith and our walk with him. So that's been, of all the really crazy kind of deep theological, missiological things I've learned from him. And he's a reader of signs. He's a semiotician and a futurist and all that. And I hope that I've taken a little bit of that in myself. But just his focus on keeping us in Christ has been refreshing.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. He uses the word, he calls them, you said, what's it, semiotics. And I'm sure a lot of people don't know what that is. I'm not exactly sure that I know what precisely that is. So what's it mean to be a reader of signs? And I know a futurist. Talk a little bit more about that. And how does that, for you, how does that resonate back with that Jesus hermeneutic about making it about Jesus? Because I'm sure when you combine those two pieces, that's a powerful insight. So could you just help folks that don't understand what semiotics would be, if I'm even saying it correctly, and then give a little background on that?
Sure. So semiotics, I had no idea what he asked me, hey, come study with me at Portland, semiotics and future studies. And I wrote him back, okay, what is semiotics? Never heard of it. And I had to Google that. And it's really actually a very complex field with multiple scholars who have different ideas about what it really is. So the simplified kind of version of it is it's the study of signs and meaning systems and communication, which includes, there's different fields of it. So it can be language and the sign of language, and it could just be symbolism. And so this is not a shameless plug, but Len and I just wrote a book together called Issachar's Secret, Contextual Intelligence for Jesus Followers. So that's in press right now. And we basically kind of unpack a theology of semiotics in that book. And contextual intelligence is about really awareness and attuning oneself to a context and understanding the meaning systems in that context, and learning to translate the gospel in incarnational ways and plant kind of contextual churches. So the biblical roots of it, it's just fascinating, goes back to the tribe of Issachar. So when David's out in the wilderness and transitioning leadership from Saul to David, all the different tribes kind of bring their offering to David and this new kind of societal thing that they're living into. And the Issacharians bring, they understood the signs of the times and knew what to do. So they bring a kind of a missional wisdom where everybody else is bringing troops and armies and different, supplies. They just bring this ability to read the context and to know what to do. So they're kind of strategic thinkers. So Jesus, really taught his disciples to do semiotics and taught them to pay attention to the context. Look around is one of his favorite things. Look, see, observe, see the birds of the air, see the flowers of the field. Don't you know your heavenly Father is going to feed you, you little flock? And, you see the changing of the seasons, but yet you can't read the signs of the times. So what he's teaching there is really a focused attention on the context around you and what God is doing. Now, I think that's one of the key characteristics of discipleship, is especially in an attention economy world today, and in a digital network society, our attention is monetized. So people are really trying to figure out how to capture what we pay attention to and monetize that through social media and digital technologies. And Jesus actually teaches us, in a sense, to break free from that and to really pay attention to placefulness and the people in our place, and to read what God is up to in our context, which is something that we're probably a little short on, in at least in the mainline denominational churches, because we try to create these franchise versions of the church that aren't really incarnational or kind of engaging the context appropriately in many cases.
Yeah, and again, there's so many good things I could follow up with that. But if you're going to take what you just said, which really you're talking about contextualization and just looking for clues, being aware, being flexible. I hear all those kind of words, and so when you're actually on the ground and you have field tested so many different pieces, and that's really what makes you such a compelling leader. You have skin in the game, and you're out there making mistakes and finding really awesome stuff at the same time, and always learning. But so we want to avoid being franchises, yet at the same time, sometimes, sort of success leaves clues. So we're still tempted to at least try to grab a hold of some strategies that have worked, and then we always have to recontextualize. But what's your process, given what you just said? And I'm just trying to push you to give maybe some clear takeaways for somebody who's like, hey, I'd like to do something like that through my community of faith, or maybe we're talking to a lay person like, hey, I want to try this in my neighborhood. So walk me through your process. I mean, you've started Bible studies and tattoo parlors. I saw that you're doing dinner church on Zoom. So do you have a process for planning and essentially implementing new strategies?
Yeah, and I would say that it's a process of failing forward and trying to figure out what the Spirit's doing every day. So I don't have like a silver bullet or 3 things in stir. But my dissertation really forced me to actually try to think about my process, because I'm typically more intuitive, and my wife calls it my fresh expression spidey senses start going off. So I get in a place and I see people congregating, doing something. I go, man, we could do this over here. And it's just kind of intuitive. But I tried to, where I found scriptural grounding is in Philippians 2, in the mind of Christ. And I created this thing called the contextual intelligence framework, just trying to explain in a more simple way what I think is going on in the process. And it's just simply unlearning, immersion, minding the gaps, which is something I learned in the UK, the gaps between the subway system, disorientation. So actually living in the tomb time. We got Holy Saturday coming up, just owning that we're in a tomb time. And then discovery, which is about resurrection, and then embodiment. So those are just big words, but the simplicity of it is we need to unlearn a lot of the assumptions that we have. And that's the starting point for many local churches, is going through a process of unlearning what we think we know. And then immersion. So Jesus puts on flesh, the one being in the very form of God, did not grasp equality with God, kenosis, self-emptying into the context, into particularity, to a particular people, particular place, and in experiencing fully humanness in a context. So how do we do that as a local church? Immersion. Then minding the gaps, seeing what's broken in this community. Where's fragmentation? Where are people alone or hungry or whatever that might be for your context? And then going through the disorientation of, okay, we see the gaps, we know that something has to be created there. And so to kind of pause and slow down, because my impulse is like, let's create it, let's build it right now. And that works in some cases, but to slow down a little bit and think through everything, that's that disorientation process. And then discovery is to say, what is God actually calling us to do and not do? Because sometimes we have a great idea and God's not actually calling us to do it. And then embodiment is to put flesh on some real thing. Maybe it's a new you, maybe it's a new, fresh expression of church or new ministry or new worship service. But something is created that's incarnational and contextual for that particular place. So if I had to think about, I'm not saying that I'm going through these steps in my head, but that's kind of the process that just intuitively unfolds.
No, that's really good. I mean, and that is the key thing. And I'm glad. I mean, I was thinking that this is going to, what this last 2 or 3 minutes is probably going to be is some real meat out of this whole podcast. It almost needs to get pulled out and be its own video, because that's good stuff. Because I mean, what you just did is, to me, what makes a person essentially a model and really a master teacher. Because like your wife just says it, your spidey senses, and it's true, because you're unconsciously competent at being this missiologist. But if you're going to teach somebody and you just laid out a plan, obviously you can make a worksheet out of that. You probably have. And again, it's not necessarily some kind of linear process. At the same time, though, for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and is just stumbling along, you've just basically gave us the gift of your spidey sense right there by breaking that down. So I hope that shows up in one of your books. And is that going to be written somewhere, Michael?
Yes, sir. That's actually, you can go and download my dissertation totally for free on George Fox University. But that is kind of the meat and potatoes of the book that we've got coming out, Leonard, Sweet, and I, the Issachar Secret book. That's the kind of the framework that we lay out.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I wish we could give that some props right now, but we'll put that in the show notes too. When's the release date? Do you know yet?
It's going to be fall of this year.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be fantastic. I'll have to have you back on if you'll come back on, and we'll just do an episode just on that when the book comes out, because that'd be awesome.
Yeah, now I should actually be talking about this, but I'm not very good at this. But last week I had a book come out with Abingdon Press called A Field Guide to Methodist Fresh Expressions. And that's really, just trying to look at our Wesleyan renewal movement and the DNA of that and how that's kind of been brought back to life in the Fresh Expressions movement today. So that book is actually out. It came out last week.
Okay, well, we'll put another link to that too, because it's a real gift. I mean, you're not only skin in the game leader of a church still, but you're also sharing all this knowledge with the world. So thank you for doing that. I mean, that was what makes life fun. So thank you so much for doing that for everybody. Now, speaking of Fresh Expressions, you've been a leader in that whole movement. Why don't you say a little bit about your involvement in that, and then to kind of push it a little bit, how do you stay fresh and relevant? Because it's because you can imagine you doing the old stump speech for Fresh Expressions, and then doing the same thing in 5 years from now or whatever, and it's still going to sound good. But since you're going to be having the responsibility of leading this Fresh Expressions, I mean, what keeps you relevant and fresh? Who do you listen to or read that pushes you in your kind of missional thinking? And how does that translate back to your work with Fresh Expressions?
Yeah, so just a quick little blip on Fresh Expressions. Started in the UK. It's a missional movement. Anglican and British Methodists got together, realized the church wasn't really connecting with the vast population, so they see the spirit up to this movement out here, little contextual forms of church springing up. That kind of jumps over to the United States. I think the amazing thing about it is it is always fresh because every context is different, and there are some probably keys or things that you can apply in most contexts. But it's just a constant process of discovery. Like every community, every church, every, possible people group. So society's really structured these people groups. So there's like tattoo parlor culture. How do you be incarnational presence in that culture and point people to Jesus who's already at work there? How do you, like a Tex-Mex and fit culture, fitness, and people love pets. There's a whole culture around that. So there's all this variation, and we get to just unleash this creativity and be in relationship with people. And I think in Luke 2, Jesus kind of gives us his missional blueprint for a pre-Christian world, but I think it actually works for a post-Christian world too. And in Luke 10 is just a couple things. He says, travel light, leave your baggage behind, unlearn preconceived notions, staff, bag, all that stuff. Go find the person of peace. And they're the person who welcomes you and opens the door to the community. Do life with them at their table, eat with them, stay with them, don't move about house to house. So this idea of permanence. So all that's there. And that's really what we're doing in Fresh Expression. We're finding the person of peace who's the yoga instructor, or the 80-year-old person who's been sitting in our pew for many years of their life, but they just have a passion to take their dog to the dog park and never really thought they could be a pastor of a church in a dog park. So I would say if we follow the Spirit, what the Spirit's doing is never not fresh, right? So it can't get stale if you're following the Spirit, because the Spirit's always blowing and moving and goes where the Spirit wants, the wild child of the Trinity.
Well, now you're getting dangerous here, Michael, because now we're talking about spirit over structure, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's have a little fun now. I'm just asking for a friend, of course, and you can answer for a friend on this one. So, what are the what are the biggest impediments, structure wise, that you find pastors run into when they're trying to implement some of these new strategies and unleashing lay people, and even like I might say starting a Bible study in a tattoo parlor?
Yeah. I think the institutional challenges, and just speaking from my friend who's in the United Methodist system, and I think it's probably true of most main lines, right, is there's a pretty set idea of a clergy's role and expectations and training and all of those things. And I think for the most part, we've been perfectly prepared for a world that no longer exists. And I had a great, training experience. I loved my seminary. Obviously, I learned so much that I use every day. There's a lot of stuff I had to unlearn too. That just is, I try to think about it in the difference between a kind learning environment and a wicked learning environment. So kind learning environments is where there's order and like a chess game. If you move the piece here, there's rules of how everything goes. And that's really what clergy are prepared for. But you're going into wicked learning environments where there are no rules, things are changing all the time and shifting. And the expectations of a Christendom church, like for one, that you're going to go to a church where there's people. Because I've been sent to 3 in a row, multiple revitalization congregations that were like 12 people, 20 people, and 30 people in churches that had, 300 and 500 people at one point in their history that have been in decline for decades. And if you go into that and you do the same thing that you've always done, or the person before you did, or the kind of the expectation, no amount of pastoral care and preaching and great, exegesis of text and all that is going to actually grow a congregation. In this new missional frontier, we're in a wicked learning environment where we have to figure out new practices, new ways to engage our community. And the answers are already in the community, like the Holy Spirit's already out there. But if we go sit in our office for 30 hours and visit every person in the hospital that needs having their toe surgery this week, and we get consumed in that work of the inherited church, and that's all we do, we're just kind of perpetuating that cycle of decline. And the greatest challenge, unfortunately, has been in this movement is many times is clergy, who are kind of really in a mental model of, like, this is how things work. And this is so outside the box of what they conceive of, a minister's role, that many of them, kind of shut down the idea. And it's not really asking pastors to do anymore. It's really about how to find ways to release the priesthood of all believers and the whole people of God, just like John Wesley did with his lay preachers in the fields. And actually, when you do it, it makes the work lighter. But
that's good. And that's good.
Probably said too much.
Well, no, there's just so much good stuff right there. But so if I'm a pastor or even a lay person and I'm in a declining church, and obviously there's lots of those around the country and around the world, and, we're hearing this and it sounds really interesting and we'd love to be part of that work of the Spirit. What would you say to the person? Like, let's say it's me, I've just gotten to a church, and, when I went to seminary, I dreamed about having a big church, but I get stuck in this little church and nothing's happening. And it's, their best days are behind them. And what would be next steps for that? If you were just coaching me, what should I do, or if to re-engage in God's mission in that church? Or maybe I've been there for a while and it's like, wow, something's got to change. So what would be just next steps if I'm interested in trying to move forward in this new way and this fresh expressions, to find a way forward for the church that I'm trying to lead or I'm part of?
Sure. So the first thing I would do would be get a team together, a team of, bright-eyed people who have a heart for the people that aren't there yet.
And that can be any age too. When you say bride-ed, it's not young, it doesn't have to be young
Yes,
pups necessarily, right?
exactly. Like we have some of our fresh expression pioneers on our team are 80 years old. But it's just people whose orientation is outside, and it can be a small team. Like we had an evangelism committee at Wildwood, and it was like 3 people, and they were like, we're the ones who couldn't get on any of the good committees, we couldn't get on finance or church council or anything, so we're the evangelism committee. And I was like, wow, not a lot of energy around that, but we just turned that into like a fresh expression team. And I think clergy gets stuck in this idea that I got to change the whole church or the whole congregation, whether it's 10 people or 50 or 500,000, but you really don't. If you can have a small team of people, and let the whole congregation know what you're doing, but just start doing some experimentation and deep prayerful listening to the community. So let that team know our job is not to build up the Sunday morning service. It's not to be on church council or finance. Our job is solely to come together as a team and listen together to our community and what the needs might be, and just do that prayerfully. And then find little cool things for that team to do, like prayer walks, or let's say we're going to meet in this third place every Friday at 3:00. We're going to go eat burritos together, and we're just going to look around, like me and you at what's that place?
Tijuana Flats.
Tijuana Flats. Yeah, that's where Burritos and Bible started, by the way, from a conversation with you.
It's good.
But yeah, so we're going to sit in Tijuana Flats, 3:00. We're just going to notice who's there. We're going to talk to the servers and stuff and just see what God does. So that would be I know it's probably, I've complicated it, but just find a team, get out in your community and listen with that team, and prayerfully kind of figure out what God wants you to do.
Yeah, I want to make a little shift in the conversation. This has been really good, and we're going to we'll talk some more when your other book comes out, because we could drill down. And but you've mentioned the word prayerfully, and I've called this podcast Deep Dive Spirituality, because I'm really hoping long term to connect spirituality, mission, missiology into a really powerful way. So this podcast, this whole thing becomes conversations about growing into the people that God created us to be. And so, what's the connection that you found between deep spiritual formation and the missional nature of the church? And has that been a growing edge, or was that connected at the very beginning? What have you learned about that, the need for deep formation while simultaneously being missional? So we have like a missional holiness, if you will.
Yeah. It's going to be a disappointing answer in some ways, but I was not really discipled in the United Methodist Church. I was discipled in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous.
It's good stuff though, right?
It's very good, which has a really clear, deep dive spirituality process. I am powerless. My life is unmanageable. I come to believe in a God who can restore me. I make a decision to turn my will. I make an inventory of all the wrong stuff I've done. Then I go confess my sins to another person, James 5, so that I can be healed. Then I go make amends with all those people that I actually hurt, so that it's not this, just overly spiritualized, I'm a Christian now, everything's good. But I have to go back and actually deal with that, clean that up by the power of the Spirit. And then, so deep dive, missional spirituality, steps 10, 11, and 12. Continue to take inventory through prayer and meditation, improve my conscious contact with God. So that's an ongoing, we call those the maintenance steps. And then having had a spiritual awakening, I carry this message to others. So that's really just fundamentally Christianity 101, that the founders of AA, Bill and Bob, pulled out that deep spirituality and kind of put it in a manageable process for people like me to get it. But so that's never something that I finish. Like right now, I'm in these new deep meditation kind of things that I'm doing, where it's just totally trying to just turn my mind off and hear from God. And I'm having like these kind of visionary, like image prayer things that are happening, and I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm just spending time in the Spirit. And I think all of our missional activity has to flow from that deep place of spending time with God, and seeing God everywhere and in everything. Like, not that we're bringing God, but wow, what's God doing over there in that tattoo parlor, and how do I join into it? So that whole having had a spiritual way and giving it away, you got to give it away to keep it, is one of the AA things that we say. So that is just so integral to the life of a missional, leader. Is my orientation is not about myself or taking care of this thing. It's for the people that aren't here yet, and how do I give this precious thing that the Lord's given me? How do I share that with others?
No, that's really deep, and that's deeper than you actually think, Michael. That's a wonderful answer. And so, so when you think about fresh expressions and even missional church stuff, how many people miss what you just said as being the foundation for it? Because you could, it's easy to criticize, and I'm not a critic. I'm on the inside of this whole thing, but from the outside, it's easy just to say these are just showmanship tactics, tricks, techniques. But underneath this, there's a whole recovery. We want to redeem the world for Jesus spirituality that's here, and that's the lifeblood for all the expressions that you're using. So you're bringing those tools to bear. So it's not just, hey, doing this cool thing, I'm out having a Bible study in a tattoo parlor. You're bringing really a holiness message into that tattoo parlor. Is that, am I overstretching to use that word, or would you agree with that or disagree, or how would you nuance that?
I would totally agree. And I think people think about holiness as something like that I possess, and it's this thing that I achieve or something, or I'm trying to, when really I see holiness as like something that needs to be poured out everywhere, like bleach that cleanses the context and actually transfigures it. And there probably are a lot of people who, this is the next new thing and it's flashy and it's all of that. So that's why I think the first part of any, missional endeavor is really that deep listening piece. And does God want you to be involved in the lives of those people? Is God calling you to that? And if it's about a show or a next new program or whatever, you shouldn't do it. But if it's about, I deeply love the people in that tattoo parlor and I want them to experience what I've experienced, then that's a whole nother posture. And it's also the fragility of, like, these things, they could die. I mean, I don't know if tattoo parlor church, I don't even know, with COVID-19, if my church will be here next month. I may be having another job next time we talk, but so there's the fragility of, like, it's not institutional. It's not about propping up numbers. It's not about, trying to get people even to give money, although that happens just organically as you do it. It really is about relationship. It's about connection. It's about it's a mutuality of learning. So it's not me coming into I've learned so much from people in tattoo culture that I didn't think when I started that church that I was going to have tattoos all over my arms, but the significance of a means of grace and iconography and all these things I've been exposed to, and how meaningful someone's story can be. And so much so that they want that to be a sign and a symbol to the world, kind of thing. So, yeah.
That's good. That's good. I have one more longer question and a couple of quick ones for you, because I'm going to try to wrap this up in about 10 minutes, just to be fair to your time. But thanks so much. This has been rich. You mentioned COVID-19 and just the timestamp of this. We're both in social isolation by necessity right now here in April Fool's Day of 2020 of all times to do a podcast, right? But yeah. So. Is the disruption of COVID-19, Michael, is it a challenge, obstacle, or opportunity for the church?
Yeah, it is. It is definitely both and all of the above. And one of the things I try to help co-leaders with me understand is the tyranny of either or thinking. Like there's usually a both and in everything. And obviously, I'm not trying to minimize the pain, the death. I have people in my church that I love, people in my immediate circle of friends that are either sick or have had people die. We've had a couple pastors even that went on the Holy Land trip and got the virus. So I don't want to minimize that in any way. I'm living in the disorientation and the pain, and I'm weeping with people. And at the same time, it is a profound opportunity to reset the church. I think every once in a while, Mother Nature shows us who's boss. And there are a lot of parts of the church, and I try to be as generative as possible about the way I talk about the church that raised me and made me who I am. But there are some parts of it that are really, really frustrating. A clergy caste system, and congregations stuck in a place of learned helplessness, and a diminishment of the priesthood of all believers. And there's some things that I really just day to day am challenged by. So I see some of that being broken loose, and I see, desperation is the seedbed of innovation. And I'm so just surprised and excited about, I see my clergy friends out there just trying stuff and failing and doing things in really tacky, not so good ways, but sharing the gospel, and people are coming to know Christ. And there's all this good coming out of it. And I don't think the church will ever be the same, at least in our age and generation. I think this is going to be a long-term, I've heard people say, well, when it goes back to normal, I don't think there is going to be, this is the new normal. And rather than seeing how do we do some digital stuff to keep us alive till we can get back into space, I think we should be saying, how do we actually create a deep theology of real virtuality and digital connection, and how do we really actually be church, keep some of what we're learning here that will become actually the next iteration of the church. So it is challenge, and it's opportunity, and it's all of it happening together. And the other key thing I see, just really the whole people of God laity stepping up to the plate. There's this cool trend I'm seeing of people our younger people learning old school ways of writing a handwritten letter, and phone trees, calling people, laying groceries, care packages on some of our older folks' porch. And they're excited and wanting to do that. And I see older people learning from younger people, how do I make a Facebook, which I haven't had my whole life, or how do I use, Zoom and stuff. So there's this whole reverse mentoring and learning exchanges happening among the people of God. It's just really exciting.
Hey, that's well, good, fantastic, and thanks for sharing some of that. Well, now I just want to go to a couple questions that I'm going to ask every person who I have the privilege of speaking with on my show here. And first one would be, all your whole library is wiped out, and you only have money to get 2 or 3 books. And again, you get a Bible. I'm going to give you a Bible because I have plenty in my office. So you have a Bible. What would be the 2 or 3 other books that you consider absolutely essential to your life, so much that you'd recommend other people read them?
Oh man, that is a hard question. I would say one is the Mission Shaped Church Report by Graham Cray and the Church of England, that just started to really conceptualize the need of a new kind of church. I would say the other one would be Manuel Castell's The Network Society. He's a sociologist, and I just think he's done a great job, actually, in some ways prophetically, kind of talking about where we are in a technological, digital kind of society. And I hate to do this because I would say anything Leonard Sweet's written, there's so much out there, but there's a book by Gerald Arbuckle called Refounding the Church, Catholic theologian, actually, that really changed my life. And he was one of the first ones to really talk about the pioneer mind and stuff. So I would say that.
Good. Well, thanks. Yeah, I have to say, I'm actually not familiar with any of those 3 books. So I just learned something today too. So that's good. So thanks for some new suggestions. Now looking at your own life, you've hinted at this a little bit. Again, this is deep dive spirituality. So what's your daily rhythm look like? What's your rule of life? What are core practices that continue to fuel you day to day as you follow Jesus?
Yeah, so we created a rule of life with our clergy team at Wildwood. So we just base that prayers, presence, gift, service, witness, and we kind of have things that we've agreed and then sign like a covenant. Here's how we're going to be and do life together. I think the key things, practically speaking, is in the morning, the first thing I reach for is the scriptures, because I was convicted by the Holy Spirit. The first thing I was reaching for was my screen, which was on my night table. And then an hour later, I'm still scrolling through, you know, whatever has stolen my attention. So I'm real intentional about, you know, I wake up and I pray. We're taught to do this in AA. You know, thank God for another day, ask him to keep us, you know, moving in a positive recovery direction, engage the scriptures, go into the prayer closet. I read scripture for me, not because I'm preparing for the sermon. So I have that scriptural study I'm doing, and then my scriptural study for my personal devotional life. And then, you know, kind of a deep every day. I can't always do it in the morning, but I try to have a significant block of time where I can just turn my brain off and spend time with God, like a prayer closet kind of situation. So those are probably the keys of it.
Okay, good. And I guess the last thing is, you know, I have from your bio, I have your Facebook and your Twitter. If people want to learn more about you or get in touch, what is your preferred? What's your preference? Where do you point people to if they want to learn a little bit more about you, Michael?
So I'm just now creating a website for the first time, michaeladambeck.com. And it's just a way, because I've been encouraged by mentors and friends to do this, to have like a central place where all my resources can be there. Most of them for free, by the way. So that'll be my new kind of thing. But definitely, you know, Twitter, Facebook, all those places, I'm in those spaces. But michaeladambeck.com will be kind of my future, you know, real estate in the digital world.
Fantastic. And that's open. That's open as of today?
Yes.
And,
yeah.
Okay. All right.
It should be live. Yeah. By now.
Okay, well, great. Well, Michael, it's been so great. I mean, this has been a rich conversation. I've learned so much, and I know this is going to be beneficial to everybody else. So thanks for being guest number 2 on the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast and video cast.
Thank you. It was good to be with you, Brian.
Thank you. And friends, until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be voices of hope to others. Amen.
Amen.